So last week I finally got to fulfill one of the fantasies I had as a 13-year-old by unboxing this 2013 Mac Pro, which came in its original box with all of its original paperwork and the Apple stickers, and is in like immaculate, beautiful condition, not a single defect on this thing. I still just really love looking at it. And I was also really happy to see that a lot of you guys shared the same enthusiasm that I have for this Mac Pro, because that video like outperformed my last 10 videos by tenfold. It was crazy. I was really happy to see that response. Now, in that video I mentioned that I was going to be doing a couple more videos with this thing, and that is still going to be happening. They're just not going to be what I wanted to do with it, and here's why. As you can see, I did take the liberty of upgrading this thing to macOS Monterey, which is the newest version of macOS that these Mac Pros support natively. Now, if you watched the video last week, you'll remember I mentioned that I wanted to keep the installation of OS X Mavericks intact, and I was able to do that because I replaced the SSD in it. This is the original 512GB SSD that came out of this Mac Pro, and if you take a look here, you can see that I now have a 250GB SSD installed in here. It's actually a 256GB SSD, but for whatever reason, this Mac Pro shows it as 250. Kind of interesting, not really sure why. However, the source of this SSD is something that you really wouldn't expect. It actually came from my friend Vinny, of all people. It came out of his MacBook Pro when we upgraded that when he first got it a few years ago, and he just kind of had it sitting around. They happened to use the same like weird wonky proprietary, not really NVMe, but kind of sort of close connector that Apple SSDs use, and he offered to give it to me so I could do this project with it, so big shout out to him for that. Now, last week I mentioned that I wanted to do a couple more videos on this Mac Pro, and that is still going to be happening. However, they're not really going to be what I wanted them to be. Now, one of them was going to be actually editing videos on this Mac Pro. So as you can see, I've got the latest version of Final Cut that'll run on macOS Monterey up and running here, and we'll go ahead and just hit play on this timeline right here. So as you can see, it's playing pretty decently, not really anything to complain about, but as soon as it hits R5 footage, this happens. That's bad. Now the reason that happens is because my A camera right here records in the H.264 codec. However, the Canon R5 records in the HEVC codec, which this Mac Pro does not have hardware acceleration for because it predates that codec. And that's why we get performance like this coming from the R5 footage, even though we have Final Cut set to the better performance setting. Now I've turned off the screen capture just to kind of prove my point further here. As you can see, we've got Finder and Final Cut open. That's the only two applications that are running at this time, and it's the same story. It plays the G85 footage just fine, but as soon as it hits that R5 footage, it plays fine for just a little bit, and then it starts dropping frames like crazy. Now I know what you're thinking, why didn't you optimize the footage? Why didn't you convert the footage to ProRes? Well, let's go back to our little storage window right here, and as you can see, we've got only 92GB available. And that's because the original media from that Mac Pro video takes up 111GB, almost 112. That means if I were to try to create optimized media within Final Cut or convert all of the R5 footage to ProRes, I would run out of storage incredibly quickly, probably before I even got a third of the way done editing the video. And I wanted to edit off of the internal SSD on this thing to give it the best possible chance to perform well, because as I found out with editing on external hard drives back in the day, fast drives are very important for video editing, especially when you're working with footage like this. Going back to the Final Cut timeline, you can see right here is where I stopped editing, right about at 3 minutes and 22 seconds. That was when I decided to just throw this entire library onto an external SSD and take it upstairs to the MacBook Pro that I usually edit videos on, and from there I was of course able to just do it normally with no hiccups at all. When I set out to do the editing video on this Mac Pro, I totally forgot that HEVC hardware acceleration didn't exist at the time this thing was created, which is kind of just another reason that it's so crazy to me that you could buy this exact Mac Pro in 2019, brand new at the Apple Store, and not be able to work with HEVC footage on it because that hardware acceleration still isn't there. They did not do anything to update this machine from 2013 until 2019. It was the same specs, same options from its launch to its death date. And that's kind of crazy to me, but that's how Apple did it with the Mac Pro. Another issue I ran into with editing video on this Mac Pro is the fact that Adobe Creative Cloud does not work on macOS Monterey at all anymore. Now, for those who don't know, I do use Adobe Audition to enhance and kind of master my audio instead of just doing it within Final Cut, because Audition gives you a lot more flexibility and things you can do with your audio. But when I tried to install it on the Mac Pro here, I got this nice little Message right here, does not work on this device. And that's because Adobe apps in general just do not support macOS Monterey anymore because it's such an old operating system. So with the unfortunate situation of not being able to make a video showing the experience editing a video on this Mac Pro, I figured why don't we just take a look at some of the comments from last week, because there are a few things that I do want to address. First comment says, I just bought one last night, 12 core, 2.7 gigahertz, 64 gigabytes of RAM and a 1 terabyte SSD. I plan on using OpenCore to run a more recent OS. I do have a plan to do that as well. That was actually originally gonna be the video that came out today, but I ran into some pretty significant issues with it and I ended up like almost bricking this poor thing. So hopefully on Friday I'll have a video of that actually working and getting macOS Sequoia running on this thing, but I just couldn't get it working today, unfortunately. He also says now I need to get my hands on a Thunderbolt display, which totally fair. These displays are awesome. They're really not anything special at this point. However, I do understand buying one just for the aesthetic, which is pretty much why I bought mine, just because it's cool and I always wanted one and I could never afford one when they were actually available and sold in stores because they were $1,000 brand new. But if you go on eBay, you probably could find a pretty good deal on one. I paid about $200 for this one and it came with its original box, which is pretty cool, but there are quite a few of them on eBay for a good price and in pretty good shape. The next comment says, don't be afraid to update it. If you boot up using Option Shift Command R, you'll be able to restore it over the internet to its original OS at any time. And yes, that is true. I am aware of that, but the reason I wanted to just do it on a separate SSD is so I don't have to do that every time I want to play with OS X Mavericks. And that's why I did it the way I did it with putting in a new SSD. So now whenever I do want to play with OS X Mavericks, all I have to do is slide the shell off this thing, throw the original SSD back into it, and I'll be up and running without having to totally wipe out everything on the machine and reinstall OS X Mavericks on it. But thank you for pointing that out. There are probably a good amount of people that don't know about that. Next comment says, the hardware is a marvel, but the OS is outdated and may create some minor issues. Regardless, still a good machine for video editing. Unless you're using HEVC footage, as we found out, which I think was the main intended purpose of the Mac Pro. Yes, when these things came out, they were pretty much intended for the professional video creators, and when they came out, you know, they were decent, not too terrible, but as time progressed and as new codecs came out like HEVC, they pretty much fell out of favor very, very quickly. So the next comment is pretty long, so I'm not going to read the entire thing, but he did mention something that I also wanted to address. The things that I was pointing to in this Mac Pro in last week's video were the GPUs. I totally forgot that every single one of the trash can Mac Pros that was ever sold did in fact have dual graphics cards. And the comment mentions what you were pointing to inside was the GPUs. Yes, you have two of them and the CPU is on the bottom board. So thank you for pointing out the fact that all of these Mac Pros do in fact have dual graphics cards, and both of the cards that I was pointing to in that video were the graphics cards. The processor is on a secondary board way at the bottom of the computer. The next comment says, the trash can is amongst my favorite computers ever made. Still jealous that we Windows users and gamers don't have anything close to this day. Love the cooling design and how you access everything. Now, the cooling design was a cool concept. It didn't really work all that well because the components in this thing are very, very inefficient, especially by today's standards, and having all of them just on one big heatsink with one big fan at the top was one of the detriments to this thing. They've had some thermal throttling issues from what I remember, but the accessibility and the way you just kind of slide the shell off the thing to get at all the components is really cool. However, this being an Apple product, not much is upgradable. You can switch out the SSD if you know what you're doing. You can get adapters to adapt an NVMe SSD into this Mac Pro, and you can upgrade the RAM, but if you want to do anything more advanced than that, like upgrading your processor or upgrading the graphics cards, it's going to be a much more in-depth process than it would be on, say, like a custom-built PC. I do agree, though, this design is absolutely beautiful, and there's really nothing else in my mind that compares to this. This was just the coolest computer that really has ever been made in terms of its design. Our next comment says, I have also wanted one of these things since its introduction. Now I want to modify it to Apple Silicon. I do have an M1 Mac laying around. Listen, man, if you're watching this video and you actually manage to like shoehorn a M1 processor into this thing, please post a video about it. I would love to see it happen. That would be awesome. And the last comment we're going to be taking a look at today says, instant downvote with putrid typical fruit computer unboxing as if the computer was something special. And the long hair. get a haircut. Maybe one day. Maybe I'll get a haircut one day, but not anytime soon. Also, man, like, no one forced you to watch the video, I'm pretty sure. If they did, I mean, I'm sorry, but I do appreciate you boosting engagement. So there you go, guys. That is gonna be it for the second video on this Mac Pro. Again, I apologize that I wasn't able to do the editing video on this thing like I wanted to. Maybe eventually I'll throw a bigger SSD into this thing and see what it can do with converting everything to ProRes. And as I said on Friday, hopefully we'll be back with a video upgrading this thing to macOS Sequoia with OpenCore Legacy Patcher. And if you want to see the failed attempt at the OpenCore Legacy Patcher upgrade, let me know in the comments. If enough people want to see that, maybe I'll upload it. But until Friday, guys, that is going to be it. So hope you enjoyed it. And as always, thank you for watching.